travelled in bands of no more than 9 because that was all you could feed at one time. I read about the struggle to keep balance between too many people to feed and none left, and to keep that balance for thousands of years. People have always had to worry about population size, in particular because of the enormous way in which human groups have wiped each other out. And the reason you get wiped out in battle is either that your armourers haven't made enough arms for your fighting men, or you haven't bred enough fighting men. You can be doomed because you haven't got enough arms for the battle today, or doomed because there aren't enough 10-year-olds coming on to fight a battle in 10 years' time. There are also maternal and paternal instincts. Humans have these strong drives. And there's also a desire by people who have too many children to be appreciated for having done something good when in fact they've perhaps been rather reckless. There's also militarism and grandiosity. Almost all mad dictators are passionate pronatalists. Napoleon's famous statement that it is the role of women to breed sons for my armies. Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Napoleon all have the same view. And it comes out in patriotic things like the famous Jingo song. We've got the men, we've got the guns, we've got the money too. And of course, Malcolm Fraser, our slightly dim if well-meaning former Prime Minister, is terribly worried that Australia needs a bigger population to be taken seriously in the world. Perhaps if we doubled it and the population of Uganda, we'd be taken more seriously. There's also, of course, a more modern issue, the economist and the businessman's fear of recession, which we do need to talk about. It is the one solid, strong argument for Peter MacDonald's position. We must have growth. There's also human chauvinism. Indifferent chauvinist means someone who is prejudiced about his own type or kind or race. We are, most of us, human chauvinists, largely indifferent to other species and environments. And that can produce such attitudes as that it's inhumane to be anti-birth or anti-life or anti-human. And then there are vested interests, the housing industry, the white goods industry, the media owners. If you're running a newspaper in a country town and you're the only newspaper or you have half of the trade, and you can double the population of your town, well, it's like a farmer who can double his area under crop. There's not one Australian media magnate who's not a passionate believer in growth. Of course, they have a few other tie-ins. The newspapers basically depend on housing ads. The Melbourne Age would close if it lost its status as the place where you advertise. As population grows, houses get more expensive, people place bigger ads, they place them in colour, and the Age thrives and survives. It may put left-wing editorials on its front page, but the other hoarding says 70 pages of property. There are very powerful vested interests in growth, particularly in the housing industry, which makes fortunes. Okay, so next one. Why do economists and business folk demand growth? I don't know how much experience any of you have in business. If you've ever been running a business, and most people who do so put all their resources, all their capital, all their time into it. They have dependents depending on them, and they have workers depending on them. And every month you must pay the bills or go broke. It's illegal to trade while insolvent. You must either pay your bills. If you can't pay your bills, you must find a bank that will lend you money. That's relatively easy if you've got a promising business and times are good. But as soon as there's a recession and things close in, it all gets grim. The horror of depressions and recessions goes very deep in the business community. That's why they're all passionate for growth. But you will find that there are responsible businessmen who don't demand endless and reckless levels of growth. They know that even if Australia's population was absolutely stable, it would still need shoes, it would need bread, it would need newspapers. A responsible business person can make a living that way. But it's the ones who live dangerously and largely illegally who are passionate for growth. A friend of mine has a wall on which he charts up each disgraced businessman and former spruiker for sky-high growth of population. You can think of a few like Steve Vizard and Mr. Pratt, who crashed quite recently. What else can I do next? 5 minutes? Gotta move fast. Yeah, there's a very interesting example of the misuse of demography. We have in this town a thing called the Australian Institute of Family Studies. Your taxes pay for it, so do mine, and it is meant to give government good advice on making things better for families. I think we're all at some level in favour of families. But of course that also can be a cover for right-wing and rather dubious attitudes. And you can see from this press release, which hoaxed the ABC into putting out a news report stating that births in Australia were not keeping up with deaths. You've only got to go to the Australian Bureau of Statistics website to discover that they're twice deaths. Our birth rate is twice our death rate. You can see every part of that press release is slanted. It begins by saying Australians want 2 children or more, so what's stopping us? But would you stop to think that probably most people would also like more cars, more holidays, would like to have backpacked through more countries, would like more of almost anything? But there's another point of having money and a free market that you make your own choices. We have fewer children, we can send them to better schools, and perhaps it isn't good for the world or even ourselves to have more children. So this whole assumption that it's an atrocity that people are not having as many children as they would like is a slanted assumption. And you notice that it then goes on to talk nonsense about us being below, our birth rate being below the death rate, deliberately misleading use of the concept of a replacement rate. And, well, I won't go through the rest of it. You can see the danger. This is an institute that uses demographers, but it uses them as a drunk uses a lamppost, for support, not for illumination. What's our next one? Very interesting issue. There are people who are sort of fatalist. You can't do anything. You know, all these problems are global. I would recommend Garrett Hardin, a very interesting, sometimes rather ruthless American bioethicist, who has some really interesting ideas on that, and why just as population socialism, so just as economic socialism doesn't work, so he says population socialism doesn't work. Each country should restrict its own population. You'll notice, of course, that most Asian countries do restrict population, particularly immigration, very severely. They do it for the same reason that the shareholders of BHP would not be happy if they heard that the directors were planning to double the number of shares by printing off an additional number and giving them away to non-shareholders. They feel they would be losing part of their ownership of their country. Growth economists don't think like that way. They believe in the magic pudding. The more eaters there are, the more the pudding grows. But again, they don't really understand the limitations on the resources. The last really interesting issue, plutocracy. Aristocracy ruled by the best. Democracy ruled by the people. Plutocracy ruled by the rich. Australia is half democracy, half plutocracy. We have genuine fair elections, but the political parties depend on so-called donations, basically from the rich. And some of these rich organisations put up very strong pressure for growth, and they make a lot of money out of growth. This is one, it's called APOP, the Australian Population Institute, which sounds very like the Australian Demographers Professional Association. It would be kind to suggest that that was accidental. And you can see the kind of propaganda that these groups put out. So be wary of propaganda, be wary of claiming that we're short of workers. Actually, most workers will tell you what we're short of is good bosses. But much more on that. Okay, thank you. I'll have a 5-minute break now, and we'll have our third speaker after.